It is my pleasure now to introduce fellow Rotarian.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Kiersten Hill, Director of Nonprofit Solutions for Firespring. The driving force behind Firespring's nonprofit solutions and an inspiration to organizations nationwide with nearly 2 decades of dedicated service in nonprofit management and fundraising. She has raised over $20 million to strengthen Nebraska's nonprofit sector. At Firespring, Kiersten enables, am I saying that right, Kiersten?
Yeah.
Enables organizations, their leaders and board of directors to achieve their mission through education and empowerment. A dynamic thought leader and speaker, she captivates audiences with her expertise on marketing, fundraising, board development, and organizational transformation. As a certified StoryBrand guide, I have to find out more about that. Kiersten has unlocked the power of storytelling, guiding nonprofits to craft compelling narratives that resonate deeply with their audiences. If you're like me, that's the part that you try and do the most, is tell those stories when we go out. In the past year alone, she has presented energy, authenticity, and relatability at nearly 100 webinars and nonprofit conferences. Her insights sparking inspiration and change. Please welcome past president of Lincoln 14 Rotary, Kiersten Hill.
Is one of my proudest titles, and I don't get introduced by that very often. So thank you. Hi, everybody. And this is awesome. I have friends in the room, so I love this. Let's jump in. If you want copies of slides, you can scan that QR code. And I'll make sure I get copies of slides. If you don't want to invest QR codes, there are sign-up sheets on the tables. I'm happy to take those. And this also goes to a 30-minute discovery session. So if you just need to pick somebody's brain about something related to communications, marketing, nonprofit, fundraising, any of that, you can sure schedule 30 minutes with me. I'm happy to visit with anybody one-on-one if you would like. So how many of you are familiar with Firespring? I love that. So yes, we are located here in Nebraska. We're a Nebraska-based company. Our office is off of 14th Street between Pine Lake and Yankee Hill, just south of Lincoln Southwest High School. We have another office in Omaha. Not everybody knows that. And we have a small walk-up printing shop in Council Bluffs. But we have clients in all 50 states in the US and 10 countries internationally. So whenever we're speaking, we say Firespring does a whole lot from right here in the middle of everywhere. We provide strategic guidance that's activated through creative solutions in marketing, printing, and technology. So we have a solution in each of those areas, but our goal is always to help businesses and nonprofits to prosper. We're the first certified B Corporation in the state of Nebraska. And not everybody knows what a certified B Corp is. I've been speaking, I did a couple of rounds this week with students at the University of Nebraska, and they all sort of glaze over when I say B Corp. They have no idea what it is. So I always explain that as a business, we don't have to focus on the bottom line when we're a certified B Corp. When we're making business decisions, we can take into account the impact of those decisions on the things we care about. Our community, causes we love, the environment, all of those things we can take into account, and it's not all about profit. So how we express our public benefit is through what we call the power of 3. So Firespring is committed to donating a minimum of 1% of our profits. The top line revenue gets donated every year to nonprofit organizations. 2% of our products get donated through in-kind product and service donations, and 3% of our people. Every full-time salaried employee at Firespring receives 8 hours every single month to volunteer for the nonprofit and charitable organizations of our choice. So this afternoon, I've got to go make some deposits for my church foundation. So I'll do that on Firespring's time. I spent some time with marketing students at UNL this week, and that's on Firespring's time. When you add all of that up, it's 3% of our workforce is donating back on Firespring's time. So that is how we use our people, our products, and our profit to do more good. All right, we're going to talk overhead myth today. This might be the longest title I've ever given. I was like, wow, I don't know what to do with that. So I do want to talk about the overhead myth because anytime someone will let me talk about the overhead myth, it's always my choice to talk about it. I'm super passionate about it. And then somebody mentioned that you guys were also interested in having a little bit of a conversation about outsourcing. So I've added that to the end, and we'll kind of try and blend the two of those together. So we're going to talk about the overhead myth, what it is, why does it matter, what is the impact on our organizations when we underinvest in those capacity related areas, how we can address the concerns that we have with donors and the concerns that they have about funding overhead. What investments can we make, particularly in capacity, that will move the needle fastest for our organizations? What, when, why, and how to outsource, and I'll wrap up with action steps, leave a minute for Q&A. If anyone wants to post on social media today, you can use the hashtag powered by purpose. You can tag us at Firespring. If you don't know how to post on social media or what a hashtag is, that is a different webinar. I do have it. So if you're interested, let me know. I can get you a copy of Social Media 101 or 102 or get you signed up for a boot camp. Okay, how many remember back to 2013 when Dan Pallotta released his TED Talk? Is there anyone in the room who has not seen the Dan Pallotta TED Talk? Really? I'm shocked by that. Okay, so this, I almost called him a dude. This guy, Dan Pallotta, he was a fundraiser. He did AIDS rides, all kinds of different fundraising. And they essentially came in overnight and shut down his entire operation because he was spending too much money on overhead. And he has become a true champion for nonprofits and the ability of nonprofits to raise money to do the really important work that we need to do. So in 2013, Dan recorded his original TED Talk. It is still on YouTube. You can view it. It's been viewed millions and millions of times. I've lost track. And in his TED Talk, he basically says that the way that we think about charities and how charities do their work is dead wrong. We are focused on the wrong things at the wrong time. Boy, this is rough. Can everybody, sorry, it's not great colors, but in his TED Talk, Dan essentially coined the term the overhead myth. And when he coined the term the overhead myth, he said that the overhead myth is this idea that you can somehow reasonably evaluate an organization's performance based only on what they spend, or conversely don't spend, on overhead. And when we're talking about overhead, I'll use a lot of these terms interchangeably. So we're talking about operating expenses, we're talking about fundraising, technology expenses, really anything that has to do with a lot of occupancy, all of those things, the day-to-day maintenance. And we will sometimes use those terms interchangeably as well with capacity building or capacity building initiatives. And this is probably my biggest frustration with the overhead myth is, and part of the reason that I remind everyone that it's a myth, because nobody knows what the number is, right? So somebody might say it's 10%. Somebody might say, no, you can spend up to 40%, 40 cents on the dollar. You can spend on operating. The other day, I think I saw Chronicle of Philanthropy, maybe about a year ago, had an article where they said 22%. It literally is a number that we pluck out of the air and throw down, and it's completely up to any individual's discretion what that too high number is. And the thing that really gets me is that it's as if the dollars that you're spending on fundraising and occupancy and those sorts of things aren't also furthering your mission. It's like those things are separate, when we all know that the work that we are doing within our organizations, all of it, whether it's fundraising or it's answering the telephones or whatever it is, those are all helping us to be more effective and efficient and further the organization's mission. So Dan did his TED Talk, and it really was the first time, in my opinion, that people sat up and listened and said, yes, this is a problem. And so at that time, these three organizations came together: the Better Business Bureau, GuideStar, which is now Candid, and Charity Navigator. Those three entities came together and they issued 2 letters. The first was a letter to charities, and they said, sorry, like we kind of messed up. We have perpetuated this myth. It's kind of our fault. We recognize that we played a role in it. We're really sorry. We're going to do better. Then they issued a second letter that went to donors. And they said to donors, sorry, we've screwed up. There are other ways to evaluate impact, effectiveness, and performance of organizations other than overhead. And we should all start focusing on different things. And so everybody got really excited. Like I remember in 2013, I was, I think I was at 2013, I would have been at what is now Give Nebraska as the executive director. And I was very excited about this. I thought this is finally going to change the way that people think about what we do. And now we are 12 years later, and we're still having these conversations. So raise your hand if in the last 12 to 18 months, someone has asked you how much your organization spends on overhead. Yeah, we've forgotten. We've forgotten everything Dan taught us. And 62% of Americans still believe that the average charity spends too much money on overhead. The truth is that when we don't spend enough money on overhead, we're actually significantly negatively impacting our organization. And there are some consequences, some true consequences that happen when we don't properly invest. So the first is that we limit or we have no staff roles or admin roles on staff, right? So we want to keep the costs low. So, the executive director is making their own photocopies and doing all the things because you don't want to hire an assistant. And so you are then limiting your ability to manage the organization overall. You're limiting your ability to monitor and track things like finance and development. Then we're limiting our investment in staff training and development. So we're not investing in our staff. There's either their skills become stagnant, or they leave, go somewhere else where they can get opportunities for advancement and training and education. Then we end up with inexperienced staff, especially in those admin roles, because we want to hire the very least expensive person that we possibly can. And so that leads to high turnover. And then the high turnover also leads to poor work quality. We end up with poor IT infrastructure. So this is like one of my favorites, like bad stories to tell. So when I was the executive director at the United Way of South Central Nebraska in Hastings, Nebraska, I was brand new. It was literally my first, my second job out of college. It was my first nonprofit job. And when I would go into the office in the mornings, before I would do anything, before I would even take my coat off or put my bag down, I would go start my computer. And then I would take my coat off, I'd put my things away, I'd go get a cup of coffee, I'd maybe talk to the person in the office next to me, and I would cross my fingers and hope that by the time I got back to my desk, that computer was booted and ready to go for the day. And I think now, with what I know, about how inefficient I was and how much time and energy I wasted on inadequate technology, but I didn't want to spend the money because everybody wanted to know what that overhead number was. And I was panicked about it. So I made poor decisions that negatively impacted the organization based solely on that. So we end up then with poor donor management. I've done this too. Poor donor management systems. So you end up with an inability to track donors and fundraising. I did this when I was at Big Brothers Big Sisters. We were strapped and we got rid of our CRM. Oh man, yeah, it was short-sighted. So for a couple of years, I ran things off of a very elaborate set of Excel spreadsheets. And if you know me, that is not a good idea because I do not do Excel spreadsheets. But I see nonprofits do this all the time. Make these kinds of decisions where you're actually negatively impacting the organization, but you're doing it because you're really keeping an eye on this budget and the bottom line. And all of that leads to poor performance management systems. So we don't have the ability to track our outcomes or to easily generate the kinds of reports that we need for grantors and those other folks. So how many of you follow Vu Lang? Okay, if you don't follow him, you have to do that. He is a nonprofit thought leader. He runs a blog called Nonprofit AF.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Yeah, that guy. Yep. Yeah, I actually had the opportunity, I did a fireside chat with him in Pennsylvania this year. He's just as cool in person as he is online. And so he's a thought leader, and he talks a lot about, you know, the overhead and how we fund our nonprofit organization. So again, it's Nonprofit AF is his blog. He blogs, I think every Tuesday the blog post comes out. You can sign up to get it in your email inbox. He is, yeah, is that better?
Yep.
He used to be with the Rainier Valley Corps. I don't think he's there anymore. I think now he's just doing his blog and his speaking. So what Boo says is that overhead is an illusion. And that when we focus on overhead, we're actually avoiding the much harder conversations about how to measure community benefit. But more importantly than that, we are distracting ourselves. So when we look at overhead, we are actually wasting time for ourselves and our donors. We are distracting from the work that really needs to get done. It's hampering our ability to adapt and to, you know, innovate. If we're always worried about whether or not something is going to work because, you know, we don't want that overhead to be too high, then we're not innovating like we should. We're not trying new things. It actually hurts people that we're trying to help. And at the end of the day, we're building inequitable systems when we are focused too much on that bottom line. So the question becomes, how do we educate donors and funders and our boards and our staff? Because you have people on your boards and your staff that also believe in the overhead myth. So we have a job to do to let everybody know what, you know, the problems are and the dangers, and we have to really change the conversations that we have about overhead. So I think we have to have really honest conversations, and we need to talk about, you know, the typical admin costs for nonprofits. So what all is included in that? And I find that people a lot of times will, there is a need for functional accounting, right? So allocating program to program and allocating you know, admin to admin. But I see nonprofits do all kinds of accounting gymnastics and acrobatics to try and move things around. When really we just need to call things what they are and be honest about those admin costs. We have to have conversations about why overhead is viewed so negatively in the sector, because we cannot change the way that people are viewing overhead if we're not having conversations about why they think it's bad. And what, you know, how should we more appropriately view overhead? And I think it's the, you know, at the end of the day, we always talk about nonprofits trying to do more with less. And doing more with less doesn't allow us to do much. And so we need to have those conversations with donors. And it really has to focus on the return on investment and not just the cost of something. So when you're having these conversations, I recommend that you start either your next board meeting or your next staff meeting with that Dan Pallotta TED Talk. It has held up remarkably well, and it is still really, really terrific. It's about 15 minutes long, and I think if you haven't showed it to your board, it's definitely worth it. We want to or if your staff hasn't seen it, we want to clearly articulate what the infrastructure needs are for the organization. You know, what do we need in order to really function as well as we should function? And secure help with budgeting, planning, and other infrastructure needs. So if you have folks who are, you know, disagreeing with how you are recommending you allocate the money or how you're using the money, then I always recommend that you put them on the budgeting committee, because that's where the really hard decisions get made and you start to understand the important role that those funds play. Now, this one sometimes gets a little controversial, but I think that we should all stop publishing the percentage of overhead that our organizations have. Because when we do that, we are even if yours is really low, good for you, but you're continuing to perpetuate that myth, right? When we say our overhead is low, what we're really saying is we're better than every other nonprofit and overhead is bad. And so we are continuing to perpetuate that myth. And it's also really difficult to compare. So this is an example of a national nonprofit organization, and they're talking about how low their overhead is. They have the highest rating, that's 25% admin for admin expenses. They're committed to transparency. All of that is wonderful. What they don't tell you is that this organization has somewhere around a $250 million budget. It is much easier to keep your admin costs low when you're talking about those kinds of numbers. It is not fair to compare that to a small nonprofit organization starting up in your community that is, just trying to get themselves figured out and get their programs going and kind of keep things moving forward. It's not a fair comparison. And my biggest issue with it is we're not doing ourselves any favors when we publish this, and we are certainly not helping the sector as a whole. So that's soapbox now. And we really want to flip the script when we get asked questions. So when a donor would ask me, what is your overhead percentage? What I would say is, it's a great question. First, can I tell you how effective our organization is? If they ask how much of my donation goes to the recipient, I can certainly answer that. But first, I want to share a little bit about the outcomes that we have and about how many lives we're impacting. How high is your admin fee? Well, that's a great question, but can you share with me why you asked and what is your biggest concern about admin costs? The reason that donors are asking these questions is because these are the only questions they know to ask. They don't understand nonprofit accounting. They don't understand the way that nonprofits are organized or function. And we have been telling them on our websites for years that overhead is bad because ours is low, so overhead has to be bad if ours is so low. So we have got to change the conversations. And so often when they are asking these questions, and I'll get into another slide on this here in a second, but when they are asking these questions, what they really want to know is, can I trust you? And will you do what I want you to do with my money? So I'll get into some really good examples of that here in a minute. But when they ask what's your overhead percentage, sure, but let me talk to you about how efficiently we carry out our mission. And how high is your admin cost? Well, I would love to answer that. First, I want to tell you about our exciting vision for the future. So we have some really big long-term goals, and here is why admin is an important part of what we want to accomplish. I think the worst thing that you can do when someone asks you what your admin expenses are is to answer with a flat percentage. That question should never have a simple answer. It should always be, I can tell you, let me explain what admin does. And you can tell them what your admin costs are. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. We certainly shouldn't be anything we hide. We should be very transparent about it. But it needs to be a part of a bigger conversation about why they're asking that question. And the fact is that there is an overhead truth, and that is that investing wisely in the right parts of our organization allows us to reach more people, and it allows us to create more impact. We are not wasting money. I think that's maybe been one of my biggest frustrations in the last couple of weeks, as nonprofits have come under this really big national microscope, is the fact that I don't know any nonprofit organization that wastes money. I don't know about anybody else, but I deal with hundreds of them every year. And I don't see any of them out there just like throwing money around like confetti. They are so responsible. In fact, I would challenge most for-profit entities to try and run as efficiently and as effectively as nonprofit organizations do. We are, we're doing good things. We are not wasting money, and we need overhead and capacity in order to do that. So this is a fascinating study. So Gray Matter puts out their research and consulting firm, and they do a donor mindset study. And I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but they asked the question, well, first of all, they said the average donor considers 19% spent on overhead to be a reasonable amount. So according to this study, that magic number is 19%. But they think the typical organization spends 28% on overhead. That's their assumption. Literally not based in fact or reality, just an assumption. Donors, this is the thing that gets me every time, but they have no idea how much their favorite charity spends on overhead. So 19% is the right amount, 28% is what everybody else is spending, but they don't care if you're their favorite charity. They do not care, they do not know how much you're spending. And the charitable sector as a whole has a reputation problem because 60% of the American donor thinks that overspending in nonprofit organizations is substantial. And we've just had this conversation that it's not, right? We have a perception problem. And I contend it's one that we've continued to perpetuate with the promotion of the overhead percentage. So I was fortunate to be able to do I did a live, it might have been a LinkedIn live, I can't remember what platform we used. But we were talking about the overhead myth back in 2023 was the 10-year anniversary of the Pilata TED Talk. And so I was talking at that time a lot about the overhead myth. And so Michael Thatcher, who at that time was the new president and CEO at Charity Navigator, was on the panel with me. And he said something that has really stuck with me. And he says that the biggest concerns that we get from donors are this feeling that they want to trust the organization. They want to trust the charity. So when you're asked about overhead and that overhead question, someone is really looking for what they can find to establish trust in your organization. And I think that if we remember that that question comes from a place of understanding and an attempt to build trust with you, I think we answer those questions very, very differently. And when you give them that percentage, that's fine, but you ultimately want to build that trust. Probably my biggest frustration with all of this is that 2013, Dan Pilata released his TED Talk. Last year, Pilata released the movie Uncharitable. How many have seen Uncharitable? I love it. It's like, I think I've watched it like 6 times. I love it so much. If you have not seen it, it should be available on streaming services. I know it's on Amazon Prime. It's a documentary with Dan Pilata is kind of the main feature of it. It was produced by Stephen Gyllenhaal, and it's really, really fantastic. So we've had all of this kind of attention on overhead, but the conclusion that I have come to, and the thing that I think about the most is that as nonprofit organizations, for 12 years now, we have been standing on the island and we've just been waiting for Charity Navigator or Candid or the Better Business Bureau or Dan Pilata. We want everybody to come and change the way that people look at our organizations. And we can't wait anymore. We as nonprofits have to change the conversations that we are having with our donors and with the community as a whole. Because we waited for 12 years. Nobody else is going to change those conversations. We have to be the ones that change them. We have to stop talking about overhead like it's a bad thing. We have to stop apologizing for investing in our organizations. So we have to sort of save ourselves. When you're asking for those unrestricted funds, there's a few things that you want to keep in mind. First of all, live your mission. Make sure that your organization is doing what you say you're doing. Prove your outcomes. Keep track of all of those great things that you are doing. Be responsible with your spending, but don't make excuses for what your overhead is. Show your value. Because again, they don't care. If you're their favorite charity, they don't care. They just want you to be providing a valuable service. Connect the overhead expenses to the work of your mission. So when we invest in fundraising and we raise an extra $25,000 this year, it means we can serve 30 more families or whatever that number is, right? So you have to show how when we raise more money, we serve more. You have to connect the admin to the outcomes and to the program itself and show that impact. You want to show how money spent on overhead equals that program benefit, how it equals enhanced outcomes, more service, more funding, and connect that donor to your mission through storytelling. If you're interested in any kind of storytelling session, I've got all kinds of storytelling stuff. I've got the half-day intensives, I've got multiple different webinars and trainings and ethical storytelling and all of those things. So if storytelling is something that you're interested in, let me know and I can certainly visit with you more about that. If you want to know about StoryBrand, I'm happy to share about that method as well. And I think we have to draw the lines. And again, in the last couple of weeks, it's just never been clearer to me that people do not understand nonprofit organizations. They don't understand the systems. They don't know how it works. They don't understand the funding mechanisms. They don't know the hoops we have to jump through on a regular basis with audits and everything else. And so we have to do a better job of communicating those things. Now, if you want to make some investments in your organization that is really going to move the needle, we want to look first at community cultivation efforts. So the reason that I talk about moving the needle and moving it quickly is because I have found that when board members in particular are concerned about overhead, you want to look for opportunities where you can have big wins relatively quickly by making those investments. Because once you have those kinds of wins and they see the benefit, they're much more likely then to invest in other things because they've seen a successful outcome. So anything that does community cultivation and engagement, whether it is like an email marketing tool or a text to give program or something, an enhanced planned giving campaign, those kinds of things where you can really increase your community engagement. Fundraising tools, so making sure you've got good CRMs that work well. Advertising and PR, often the very first thing that gets cut and usually one of the most important things that you need to maintain. Brand updates. If, I know Children's just went through huge rebrand. If the brand is no longer serving the organization, or I've seen a ton of nonprofits where maybe their logo looks like a toddler or a little kid, and now they do adult and family work, but their logo is still a kid. Total mixed messages, right? So if your logo is no longer serving you, or if it's boring or nobody recognizes it, or it's just then it might be time for a rebrand. It's the official term. Your digital presence, whether that is website certainly, but also social media, and investing in people who can do that work and do it well. Not just somebody who's gonna post 5 times a week, but somebody who's going to post with intention, who's going to engage your community, who's going to move things forward. Staff compensation. Let's get the very best people in nonprofits and let's pay them what they're worth. And let's, really see this industry be one that the marketing students that are graduating from UNL want to be a part of, as opposed to one that they just accidentally end up in, like I'm guessing most of us did. And then strategic planning and restructuring. If you just need that vision and that restructuring, Those expenses are ones that when you make those investments, they seem to really speed things along and help to move the organization forward. So these are my favorite places to recommend those initial investments, but anything that helps you to function better as an organization and helps you to serve your clients and your donors better, those are all going to be good investments. So I don't know, anybody else feel like that some days? But what if we don't have the capacity? Or even worse, you think, oh, we can make it work with our existing staff. We'll just handle the strategic plan. We don't need to hire consultants. It'll be fine. Right? That's even worse than saying we don't have capacity. So what I used to always, so my background is all in nonprofit management and fundraising before I came to Firespring. So I was most recently director of development at the Lincoln Children's Zoo. Before that, I was the executive director of Big Brothers Big Sisters here in Lincoln. And for 10 years before that, I ran Give Nebraska. And one of the things that I've always tried to focus on in all of those roles is there's no official term, I don't think, for this, but I used to always call it highest and best use. Am I using our staff at the highest skill level that they perform at on behalf of the best use for the organization? And what that often meant was my highest and best use was probably not folding the fundraising letters. My highest and best use was out talking to donors. My highest and best use was overseeing the program. My highest and best use was not spending 2 days creating financial reports because I'm bad at financial reports. And so you don't want me doing that because it takes me twice as long than it would someone who is experienced at that. And it's just not my strength. Use me in the highest and best use, talking to people, talking to donors, doing promotion, doing PR, doing marketing, even HR or something like that, anything but those other things. Am I using my talents for the highest and best use? And the same with my staff. Am I using their skills for the highest and best use? So these are the things that I recommend when it comes to outsourcing the automatic things that you look to outsource. So accounting and financial management, marketing and communications, including graphic design and web development, payroll and human resources, grant writing and feasibility studies. So I was interested when I was doing research to talk today about outsourcing. One of the things that several places recommended was outsourcing your fundraising. I'm not a proponent of that. I took all of that out because fundraising, in my opinion, and I'm guessing in most of yours, is about relationship building. And I don't think you want to build relationships with contractors, right? You want those relationships to be with your organization. But there are things like grant writing that are not relationship based, feasibility studies, those sorts of things where you either need an outside perspective or it's not based on building relationships, but you can bring people in to help alleviate some of those responsibilities. Event planning and management. We did a garden party when I was at Lincoln Children's Zoo. It's one of my favorite events. I loved it. I actually didn't mind planning it. We raised 400 and some thousand. Tremendously successful event, but it took months of my time. Was that highest and best use? Could we have hired someone to come in and do that planning who focused on nothing else but that to alleviate my time to do something else? That remains to be seen. But legal services, unless you are an attorney, you should obviously be outsourcing legal services. IT support and technology and strategic planning. I think those are all areas where if you are looking to outsource, these are the natural conclusions. So we should outsource when we are looking at cost versus efficient, cost and efficiency. Is it going to save us money? Is it going to make our operations more efficient? If you need specialized expertise, so I've mentioned financial reports, not my thing. I've taken accounting, I can do it. I can understand financial reports, I can explain them, I can even prepare them, but it's not my skill set. And so much better to hire someone as a contractor who has that specialized skill set. They can do it much more efficiently and effectively than I can. In the end, that is more, we're making a better use of donor dollars by outsourcing for efficiency and cost than if I were doing them myself in-house. If you are building something like a strategy or a program, bringing in that outside person is always good. If you have a prolonged open position, or you have a position that really needs a specific person, a specific skill set, something that is going to be hard to hire for, temporarily filling that with an outsourced person can be a nice solution to keep things moving forward while you're filling that role permanently. And then if you're wanting to scale up or down quickly and you need some help in doing that, you got to keep things going on your program A, but you want to start program F. So you hire somebody to come in and help get program F up and running and off the ground while you focus on the things that keep everything moving forward. That's another good place to outsource. So a checklist to just identify, when you want to look for an outsourcing partner. So, or what you want to look for in the partner. First of all, I always put reputation and references first. I think, you can do a Google search, but I would much rather pick up the phone and call 6 nonprofit friends and ask who they've used, because then I know, that I'm going to get somebody that someone else has worked with successfully. Do they have experience with nonprofits? There are lots of people out there that hang out a shingle that say they can do consulting, but then they have no idea what nonprofits are. Do they have expertise in the area of need that you're bringing them in? Do they understand nonprofit compliance? If you're bringing somebody in to do something, do they understand donor confidentiality, and which I think is coming up here in a second, but do they understand the things that we have to comply with and why? Do they have competitive pricing? I don't think that should be the bottom line decision maker. We shouldn't always decide on price, but it does need to be a factor. Clear communication and reporting, use of up-to-date technology and tools. If they're not using, a messenger program, for instance, where they don't like to text message or whatever it is, if you're a texter, then that's not the person for you. You want to make sure that they're, going to communicate with you how you need and want to be communicated with. We have to make sure that they abide by confidentiality, that they're a culture fit with the organization and mission. There's a lot of consultants out there, but not all of them will align with the culture and the mission of your organization. Track record of meeting deadlines and deliverables. Are they a proven commodity? Willingness to customize to your specific needs. So do they come in and just, here's my standard way that I do this, or are they willing to make concessions to work with you? What is their working style? And do their skills or preferences complement the person who will be supervising and working closest with them? In many cases, ED or leadership. I don't know if any of you know Suzanne Tyrrell. So Chan's wife, Suzanne. When I was at Give Nebraska, we did a massive strategic overhaul. We went from about 42 board members who were all representatives of our agencies to a community-based board of about 12. And we changed how the board was elected. We literally just scrapped the organization and reformed it essentially. And Suzanne helped us do that work as a consultant. Part of what I loved about working with Suzanne is that she was incredibly detail oriented and she was excellent at communication and her follow-up was impeccable. All of those are things that I am not great at. And so she was really the perfect consultant to work with me because her skill set was a really terrific complement to mine. And so even though somebody might, not be the most cost effective or might not look like, they have done XYZ specifically that you need them to do, I will oftentimes look at that skill set complement and I'll choose that as the deciding factor over anything else. And outsourcing is important because it allows us to innovate. It allows us to try some new things without the burden of bringing on a staff person where if the program doesn't work, then you've got to, let that person go, which none of us like doing that. But it allows us to try new things. It helps us to manage the risk that we have. It is typically more cost effective. We get increased transparency and more thorough reporting. Main focus on the core mission. So we can consider scaling or shifting. We can consider other things while we're staying focused on the mission. The biggest thing I think is that you get an access to an expertise or a skill set that you most likely cannot afford internally. So whether it is, a graphic designer or an accountant or a director of human resources, all of those are very specialized skill sets that if you want someone to do them really well, you're going to have to pay a premium for that, good skill set. Where if you outsource it, you can get someone with a much higher level of skill and experience, actually less cost to you, and they can complete it more effectively and efficiently. So it improves your efficiency. And I go by the high tide floats all boats mantra. And so I think, when we're looking at outsourcing, how can we help all of our organizations, all of our staffs, all of those things to be successful? So the action steps are focus first on return on investment as opposed to cost. So how, what I should not, when I was at United Way, have looked at how much a computer was going to cost me. I should have looked at how much was it going to improve the organization overall. Share the overhead myth with your team and supporters. Watch pull out a TED Talk, then watch Uncharitable. Identify one area in your organization to invest, and that will help you to grow your mission. Then propose one task or project annually that can be outsourced. So look for those opportunities to outsource. Look for those opportunities to bring in a different experience or skill set. Print out that outsourcing checklist because I'll send all of you the copy of the slides so that you can uncover potential partners or vendors that you could work with, and keep learning. Attend more webinars from Firespring. We've always got free training and education. We're happy to share that. You guys are maybe not quite, doing all of the things. Some of you might be where you're, IT and admin and graphic design and events and all those things. We at Firespring recommend that you let your website do the heavy lifting. It is not coincidental. We have an awesome website tool. So if anybody's looking for a website, let me know. And in addition to websites, Firespring does marketing, printing. We do communications, planning, strategic guidance, all of those things. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. On the education side of things, I do want to bring attention to a webinar series that we're doing next week. So next Tuesday, we're kicking off a crisis communications webinar series. So on Tuesday, we had Joanne Brody, who is a crisis PR specialist. She's out of Los Angeles, a friend of mine, and she's brilliant with crisis management. So she is going to be talking on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about getting back to basics. So making sure we're focusing on good storytelling, good donor communication, What is the messaging that we're sharing? How are we doing it? Donor stewardship, those kinds of things that we need to be focusing on in this kind of time of uncertainty. And then on Thursday, we have a professional coach, Kim Rathie, is going to be talking about how to care for yourself and your staff when we're dealing with times of crisis and uncertainty. So that is available. All of our education and training is free of charge. So you can go sign up at firespring.com/webinars for that series or any other education opportunities that we have. Those are all on our website. And that QR code just gets you a copy of the slides and you can sign up for discovery if you're interested. And that leads me to questions. What do we have for questions? What do we want to talk about? Yes.
I got a list.
You can do this. You don't have to do this.
I tend to dominate. Is it too confrontational to ask donors how much of a salary would be reasonable in the private sector?
I think it depends on how worried about the donor. The thing I don't like about that is that then we open up, what's reasonable to one person versus what's not reasonable. I mean, I think there are other ways that I would find to have that conversation. But if you know them really well, and that's, certainly, we're certainly not paying our staffs like we should, or what they would get if they were in the private sector. One nice thing about Firespring, I'll be honest, I mean, it's, I get to now work with hundreds of different organizations, and it's, I've never made the money that I'm making in the private sector, just personally, because I've worked in nonprofits for years. So yeah, private sector is certainly a different game. Yeah.
So do you have a story or an example of kind of this mind switch from cost versus ROI, maybe an institution you work with, and how did that turn around? And was there something specific that organization used to make that mind switch happen?
Yeah, I think maybe the best example is Give Nebraska when I was there. We just had a lot of really inefficient systems. And so investing in strategic planning and restructuring, we would raise on average somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 a year. And the vast majority of that went back out to the agencies as payment, pass-through payments. So we wanted to keep our admin low because we wanted to let the agencies get as much as they could have. But we also knew that there were things that we needed to do in order to serve them better. And so instead of looking at the fact that this strategic planning is going to cost us $20,000, we looked at it as this $20,000 investment is going to change the way that we can serve you for the future. That's an example of a board who had to make the decision to take money and control out of their own hands in order to invest in changing the organization, because that change was going to, it was going to serve them all much better in the long run. So it's looking beyond what is the price tag for this and looking at what is the impact. What can we do with this? If I invest in a good CRM, I can now segment my donors so that I can communicate with them better. When I can personalize the messages, they're going to give more. When they give more, we make more. So this is an investment, but it's not just about the cost. It's about what it creates for the organization overall. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think we all have that opportunity to look for those.
Yeah.
Those stories in our organizations. I think that's really powerful. And I'd love how you switch that. It's very helpful for us to be looking for those opportunities to share those examples with our board, with our administration. I think especially in plan giving, we struggle with a current cost versus a future benefit. And so it becomes more applicable for us to get this in funding.
Well, and we were visiting and during the conversation at the beginning, about, you know, we don't know what the future holds. And so leaving gifts with more flexibility helps everybody in the long run, because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, 25 years ago, we had no idea that every single person was going to need Zoom. Right? We had no idea that Zoom was even a thing. But where would we all be without investing in that technology on behalf of our organizations? And so having those conversations with donors that, you know, there are these internal admin expenses that may be essential for us to do our work that we can't even fathom right now. And the importance of investing in the organization. And again, when we're investing in our organizations, the bottom line is that our mission is furthered. Even if you're investing in the person who answers the phone at the front desk, we're all advancing our missions. And those investments just go into a different line on the accounting form, but it's all driving mission forward. And I think so many people don't understand that and have lost sight of it.
I would say to your point, so my foundation exists to solely serve our school. So when I started, I had more of like a business background, and my predecessor did it. She would always report on operation expenses. But to me, that didn't make sense when 90% of the dollars we raise go directly to the school. So I was like, this isn't painting a very clear picture to my board that we're being effective and efficient. So when I tell them, yeah, my functional expenses of fundraising is 11 cents on the dollar, but my overall overhead cost to run the foundation, just dollars to the foundation, is 23 cents or whatever. But then when I tell them, but we raised $4 million last year and our ROI for the entire organization was 400%, that is something business people understand. Yeah. So they're like, oh, okay, you could spend $9,000 on your database. You know what I mean? Or I say, I can hire a prospect researcher or a data scientist to come in and get my wealth analytics done for me for this campaign. Or you let me pay the $9,000 I need to get my raising and wealth analytics that'll screen in for me. Which one would you like me to do? You know, like, yeah, let's do the wealth.
Yeah. And I think, again, our natural knee-jerk reaction, I think, for most fundraisers and nonprofit folks is our need, and I still have to check myself. And I've been talking about this for years, but my instinct is don't spend it. Like my instinct is don't spend it, don't talk about it, don't, gotta keep that cost low. And it really does require a mind shift. And it requires that we change the way that we're looking at how we do our work.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Like we've recently started outsourcing our marketing for the longest time, for 7 years that I've been there, had an in-house person who recently just switched to be like a teacher at our school. And so I was trying to determine, do I hire someone new or do I outsource? I'm happy with the product we're getting, but I do feel like it's still just having like being the liaison is taking still a ton of mine and my staff's time. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you balance well, it might be cheaper to be paying someone. I'm now losing time because we'd be locked over in the projects, kind of be their liaison. What's that balance of, and then it's hard because they don't write like we speak, or it's just kind of that like, well, they understand our mission, but this doesn't sound like us, so it's kind of refining that.
Yeah, so a couple different things. I think if the voice and tone isn't right, your agents, your contractors should be able to get the voice and tone right. And so if it's off, do you have like a messaging guide or something that formally and now that formally looks at your voice and tone?
I think part of it in the beginning was maybe some growing pains of just
Yeah.
kind of being like, okay, like doesn't sound like us, you know, or we always say the high sense family, you know what I mean? That's some of the things that we terminology we use.
Yeah.
What I wasn't really prepared for was the amount of time now that it's taking away from my internal people who are like fundraisers or whomever to get those pieces, you know, the back and forth.
Yeah.
Where then I'm like, well, am I really saving money because it's taking time away from other people?
Right, and I think, you know, that's one of those where I'd run a timesheet on it for everybody, just, you know, little tally mark, so you're keeping track of how much time you're spending, so that you can really do a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Theoretically, maybe not in the beginning, it might take a while to get up to speed and those kinds of things, but theoretically, that outsourcing should be taking that stress off your staff. If it's not, then that's probably not, the outsourcing relationship probably isn't quite right. Yeah. Hopefully it's not Firespring.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.